what my talk, such as it is built around, is an experience that I have never communicated in this fashion to anyone, either verbally or in writing. And thus it may have a certain uniqueness, or again it may not. But I think around it I hope to build a little mental and intuitive structure which might come in handy in the course of our individual spiritual journey and development, and as such I feel that it will be important. As you all know, I am of, well, shall we say, advanced age, and as such one always has to count with the possibility that your present activities or disclosures, well, might be the last or almost the last, but this is just something to count with. It's not something that I'm predicting. So some of you may be aware, on the basis of various disclosures, that over a period of time, at one time for about a 10-year period or so, I had a very unusual individual as a teacher. Much of that time he wasn't here, he was in England, although he was a native of Australia. And I have some places here where you might find more about him, recent publications in the journal New Dawn from Australia, and you can look at these, and I'll have them copied in addition to that. Now, you may recall, many of you, last few weeks, even before the Tarot, that we addressed ourselves to some extent on Fridays here, and also on the once-a-month Thursday evening book club. We addressed ourselves to the, well, how should one put it? I love that expression of Max Heindel, who himself was not an English speaker but a German. Us foreigners always manage these things. So Max Heindel's expression was a cosmoconception. Now, isn't that a grandiose word, grandiose term? And so in reference to the cosmoconception, let us say, which we have been dealing with over the last few months in various ways, I am building to some extent on the foundation of a certain understanding, particularly of Blavatsky's secret doctrine and her subsequent writings and career, which are not that well known because they were only discovered a few years ago, so 100 years they were hidden, and they are very significant in their content, and maybe the next time I will bring along the books that have been published on that basis. One was published by the Theosophical Publishing House in Adyar. The other one was published by a European publishing company. In any event, these are, let's say, novel disclosures concerning the intentions and also the putting in action of the intentions of Madame Blavatsky, whose the anniversary of her death date, by the way, will be next week. That's traditionally among her followers and the Theosophists, it has been called White Lotus Day. And she asked of two short poems or short portion of longer poems to be always recited in her memory, and I shall do that next Friday. In any event, in connection with the various ways that Blavatsky focused on her work, and in connection with that, it has become quite evident that she had more to say, more to write, more to disclose, and that the multi-volume and really rather awe-inspiring Secret Doctrine, as awe-inspiring as it is certainly not the only thing that she wrote, and also I would say to look upon it as her principal contribution has also revealed itself now as somewhat false, because she had more to say, and she was saying it, and pretty much when she was saying it on May the 8th in the last years of the 19th century, she went to her, I am sure, considerable reward. So by mentioning this, I indicate that the main curious circumstance, which is really the subject of my talk tonight, is one that is of very great importance, because it dovetails very, very closely with what apparently, according to various items of evidence, Blavatsky wished to continue her work with. It is very closely connected with the keynote that she was working with, but which she was not able to express fully owing to her quick death. Now, that being the case, we need to a little bit recall that Blavatsky was operating in the Secret Doctrine and in some of her other writings, like the Voice of the Silence, which was already a sort of her later disclosures and others. She was working on the doctrinal underpinnings of certain profound experiences, which she quite openly proclaimed, and which she would have advocated and trained people in if she had lived longer. And so concentrating for our purposes this particular aspect of her late teachings, let me just say that she obviously, as she has expressed in the Secret Doctrine and some other work, she taught a cosmoconception which is of a thoroughly Gnostic nature as far as Western esotericism is concerned, and which can act as the important background and the underpinning of what I'm about to somewhat reluctantly talk about. Now, jumping from that little background to the actual event, which I would say gave rise to these considerations this evening, I need to mention, although it's often present in the literature, and it's, for instance, in this couple of magazine articles from an Australian publication, it is quite extensively written, and I brought them so that we can, if we wish, include them in a biographical material, because this is not anywhere else. In any event, it concerns the fact, although I am not a great friend of facts, it concerns the fact that at a fairly early or so early middling period of my life and my career, I, for a relatively short period of time, I think no more than about altogether the distance and not distance for about maybe 2.5 years, I had a very remarkable teacher. And he left us sooner than we thought, even though he had indicated earlier that his time was coming. And he went by the occult known the plume of Richard Duc de Palatine. There is quite a bit of information about him. Since he was an Australian by birth, he was born and raised and schooled in Melbourne, in the state of Victoria, and then during, I think right after World War II, although he had been on a ship during the war, sort of reconnaissance work, as he told us, he moved from Australia to England, and eventually for the last couple of years or so to America, and of course all important people moved to Los Angeles, where else, you know. In any event, I must say that of all the unusual and strange people whom it was my privilege to meet, this one was the strangest. And he was strange in several ways. Not only did he advocate and teach a way to try to explain it in related terms, which really has to do sort of in the theosophical system. One would call it the higher self, the transcendental self of the human being. And he was of the view that this higher self, which in the magical tradition, the ceremonial magical tradition, is usually referred to by the known the plume of HGH, the Holy Guardian Angel. The phenomenon of relating to this mystery can really only be understood in terms of the psycho-conception that she had brought to us. So you see, that is why one should not, I sometimes do, because it's sort of part of my Hungarian flamboyance, that I will be somewhat appear to be disdainful of the more theoretical aspects of theosophy or occultism, because I feel that they have become, in many instances, too theoretical, and that their raison d'être, as we call it in French, is really not that, but rather the ability of the human being to follow a practical course whereby some of these disclosures can be made into an experience, and that this was very important to her. And had she lived longer, we undoubtedly would have received a good deal of material from her mouth and from her pen, but unfortunately we did not. So that cosmo-conceptual background is important to even attempt to understand a particular experience that I'm about to talk about, if I don't become too tongue-tied. And it has to do with the fact that indeed, if the proper kind of striving and various ceremonial and even more importantly meditative experiences are undergone by an individual, then a shorter or longer coming together of the human personality and the higher self or the transcendental self can be accomplished. And this was really his work, and this is practically all he lectured about, all he spoke about, and I certainly, after my first encounter with him, when he first came to America, which must have been about probably, I think it was still prior to President Kennedy's death, which was 63, wasn't it? So probably around 60, 61. In any event, his message was that we have, all of us, every human in the world, no matter what nationality, what species of human they may belong to, everyone has another self, another spiritual being inside of you, which for the most part is usually not openly manifest, but which even when it is sort of in a condition of latency, it has the ability, it has the power to greatly influence the life and the spiritual career, particularly of the individual concerned. Now, that just as a little background. So now, the older you get, the more you get involved with your memories, probably because you sort of figure that's almost all you got. In any event, this is a vivid memory by way of its nature, and the scene occurred in my little headquarters on Melrose Avenue at that time, 4758 Melrose Avenue, where Bishop Palatine, who then also became my consecrator in the church, where Bishop Palatine was holding forth to rather smallish group, probably fewer people than what we are here tonight. And when I would say I had one of my most remarkable experiences that I can remember. In any event, he got his talk started with the various biblical and occult references to the much abused term brotherhood, indicating, for instance, from the sayings of Jesus, from the sayings of the apostles, all kinds of people, that this was definitely an esoteric concept, whereby the great messenger whom we know as Jesus was bringing forth the need for a certain internal and sometimes also external relationship, whereby the togetherness, the common descent, the common nature of humans to each other could be made manifest. And I think he probably brought it up because of Blavatsky's insistence that the Theosophical Society was founded on a brotherhood. That it is a brotherhood which extended to all humans, no matter where they may find themselves, and which, by way of this relationship, would create, hopefully, in the long run, a worldwide community who were involved in and dedicated to these principles. So, that being the case, it needs to be understood that he mentioned now, you can take that concept of brotherhood, the concept of the community, what in Latin was called the ecclesia, which just really means the people coming together, that these factors are in them, even though they seem to be so mundane and everywhere proclaimed and maybe in many places looked down upon, that they are really based on very, very important spiritual principles. And so we went on talking about how we can get closer to each other, how community is built, on everything, many things of that nature. And you start by remembering and reminding yourself that indeed you are closely related to every human, and that this relationship is like a great spiritual family, and that you should be aware of that, even if you personally don't particularly take to that individual, but that needs to be remembered. And then he says he was speaking ecstatically much of the time, and that was the case that time too. And then he switched over by saying, this is it. The reality of the community of the brotherhood is based on some very great and very important mysteries, and then he came to say, you are related to your brother, to your sister. You are related more intimately than you would be in a blood relationship and so forth. And in addition to that, then his face would change. He was not in a trance, but he could manifest things from within in most unusual and sometimes disturbing ways. But in any event, he came forth and said, what ultimately you have to really recognize and live is that you are your brother. And that really, really scared me. There are not too many people who I would like to be. I kind of like myself the way I am. I'm sorry, there are a lot of people who don't share that view, but still it's true. But of course, the way he brought it forth and said it was a very impressive way. So I was, we had it was my living room. It was sort of maybe about a little smaller than half of this room. And for some reason, when he started talking, I was standing in the room. We had chairs put around. And at that point, I tried to sit down, and I sat down next to my chair on the floor, because I was so shaken up by that disclosure. And then he explained further, and what is needed now, if we take this seriously and not as a figure of grandiloquent speech, what is really needed is the background of the psychocosmology that was in Blavatsky and that is part of the esoteric tradition to begin with. And where that comes in is that if we look at the cosmogenesis, as it is called in the secret doctrine, you know, in the origin of all things, we see that the explanation for the cosmic and earthly happenings is precisely that there is a unitary source. The eternal parent, wrapped in her ever invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. The beginning of the stanzas of John in the Secret Doctrine. You find it in volume 1 at the beginning, before there is even any chapter. Very poetic material, the so-called stanzas of John. And to my knowledge, if I am not ill-informed, the stanzas of John had been verified, shall we say, or given additional authenticity by none other than His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, when he was at our Theosophical National Headquarters in Wheaton, Illinois, and he was looking at it, and oh yes, he said, we know what that is. This is part of our tradition. It is a scripture in the tradition, he said, which is not much used nowadays, but Blavatsky, whom he also called a bodhisattva, because of all her work for humanity, that Blavatsky knew that, but it was her task to bring that particular tantric Buddhist tradition back. So that no doubt adds to the material a certain amount of prestige and authenticity, but let's say to extricate from the stanzas and her commentaries on the stanzas this particular element, what it really amounts to is that when the eternal parent, the supreme intelligence, the supreme source of all being awakens and begins to emanate from his or its own nature all the aspects of himself, the great waves of light or sparks that flow down from the top of. I always envision the cosmic scheme as something in the shape of a pyramid. But that's maybe just because I like Egypt. So as it flows down from above, and I had once a crazy idea, I had many crazy ideas, but this one I never got to fulfill, but who knows, if I have enough time maybe I will. I had an idea of constructing or having constructed an elaborate fountain with some kind of a liquid in it, whether water or I don't know, colored liquid. I would prefer champagne in it, but in any event, and somehow the principal storage unit of this fountain would be up above, and then from there it is allowed to flow into various vessels, which could be built like the 10 Sephiroth of the Kabbalah, and as they flow start with the first one and then overflow into the next one, it would make quite a spectacular fountain. So you see, I probably missed some of my calling because this is a kind of aquatic engineering, but in any event, I think it would be a great tangible illustration of what we are trying to talk about, namely that there is we are not talking about what in Latin is called creatio ex nihilo. We are not talking about a creation out of nothing. And Jehovah is there, and boom, there are the tree of life, and another tree, and there is a snake, and talking snake too. I mean, you wouldn't want it to just hiss, and all of that. But rather that the manifesting, which people think is creation, is a gradual unfoldment of a tremendous amount of internal reality, and that it starts at more tenuous, etheric, and well, you could want to use those terms, astral and so forth, non-physical realms, and then slowly descends further and further down until it reaches 2560 North Beechwood Drive in Hollywood. It can be reckoned in other ways too, but that then the final station going out from the source is our physical world. And that is why Blavatsky, you might say, very consistent with the esoteric tradition, certainly, but even long before Carl Jung had indicated that the human in his total nature, in his psychological and spiritual nature, is a multiple being, and that the human has a physical self, the human has an emotional self, it has an intellectual self, and ultimately it has a transcendental self which reaches into the higher realms. But of course, in extroverted cultures and various unfortunate developments of that sort, this multifaceted jewel that is existence. We live in a multifaceted jewel which is our life. Even in this strange and often unpleasant world, it is there. And so ultimately, when there is to be a deepening and a transformation, and perhaps even, it's easy to play with these words, transformation and information about these ordinarily not visible worlds, we come to see that we ourselves are multi-natured and multifaceted, and it is really the understanding of these many selves that we are, and the utilization of that understanding, hopefully for a good end, that a good and productive and holy, if we want to use that term, life should be dedicated. And that therefore, as we ourselves come to be transformed, come to become more united, as C.G. Jung calls it, individuation, the more of that takes place, then the greater a grasp we have on that fabulous titanic structure, which has no visible, no sensible dimensions, but which is part of us and of which we are a part. And that is, of course, the total cosmic and transcosmic mysterious cosmos where we live, and where all manner of beings whom we ordinarily would not see, and even extraordinarily probably don't see, so that an imperceptible, mysterious inner world. And that is very, very important. Now, the conclusion to be drawn from that at a deeper level, particularly when we take Blavatsky's statements and statements of other esoteric teachers, is to understand that we have the ability, not only the ability, but even in a sense the task, the duty, to recapitulate our original development. Unfortunately, Blavatsky lived in the Charles Darwin era, when Darwin became a sort of minor god of the Western world. And there, of course, the great and sacred word, which is still being repeated in a clever way by the fundamentalist preachers on television on Sunday evening, they pronounce it evolution. So that they build evil into it because they feel that it's not biblical and all that sort of thing. So in any event, I always, ever since I became acquainted with Blavatsky, and so I regretted that they couldn't pick another word than evolution for the developmental processes that they were trying to describe. Because the processes are so complex and so wild, if you ever get a glimpse of them in a dream or a vision, or otherwise you'll agree with me, that they cannot be reduced to a simple evolutionary procedure. So that was merely a popular word arising from presumably scientific sources, and then it became a sort of shibboleth, a kind of a buzzword, oh, evolution. And I know in this very room in the 1950s, when the Theosophical Society bought this building and when we fixed it up and everything, I argued more with my fellow Theosophists, all of whom were at least 3 times my age, because I was in my 20s. I argued with them, I said, I don't want to hear that word evolution. But of course they kept using it just the same. In any event, because I could bring up all innumerable arguments against the word and the concept of evolution, but it wouldn't be necessarily germane to our purposes. But what is important is that when the Blavatsky actually calls it in some of her later works the essence, when the essence entered the human, or when you want evolution, I'll give it to you. I'm so generous. See, so okay, if the human evolved to that point, I don't give a hoot what you call it. But the issue is that in the process of forthcoming through this vast, incredible thing, which really the total psychocosmos is, that in the course of that, how should we put it? Well, there are poetic expressions that are quite nice, like that, which is used by the secret doctrine as the spark and the flame, and that indeed from the great transcendental flame, the ultimate source of the all, a little representative spark, or a small flame, a fire, was given to every human. And that is the essence of the human. But it's not easy to discover it. And in one of the kind of a little bit tricksterish explanations that I read, I think is a Hindu one, where it said that the creator, God, Brahma, probably had a great treasure after he created everything that he wanted to hide somewhere so that the humans then later on could find it. That kind of a cosmic hide and seek. And so he asked the other gods, that's what they do, the gods. They sit around and they smoke their hookahs and they eat their curry and whatever, and if they were not vegetarians, they probably not, then I would say they chew the fat. I don't think that is a metaphor pleasing to the gods and the goddesses. But in any event, there they were, and so this one god who arranged all of this asked his fellow gods, he says, look, where can I hide this precious jewel, this precious treasure, where the humans who are so clever, we gave them much too much intelligence, we shouldn't have done that, said the gods. But, they will find a place no matter where I hide it. This is a very great challenge. And so the gods went around and one of them said, oh, well, hide it in the depths of the ocean. And they said, oh, with my foresight, I can tell that it will make funny little boats that they will call U-boats, and with that they'll go to the depths of the ocean and they'll take the treasure. And then similarly, he foresees all the ways that humans could do this. And then one of the gods who just sat there quietly, I don't know which one it was, it sounds like something that Shiva would do. He said, oh, I tell you what you should do. He said, take that treasure and put it into his very nature. Bury it in his heart. Let him be the unknown carrier of this immense nature. And you know, that's the last place he's going to look for it. A good little story. After all, it comes from a storytelling culture, but I think it's very good. So this is really what we are talking about, that there is what Blavatsky in Secret Doctrine and other writings call the essence, and it is a very particle, a very portion of the highest, most transcendental divinity or Godhead. Madame Blavatsky, when talking to people, she generally used Hindu expression because the Hindus have so many gods, and it's easier to express the really esoteric concepts in Hindu or maybe even more in Buddhist terms, because after all, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they come from a different world of thought, and to express these subtle and different ideas becomes very difficult. But anyway, this, whether we use metaphors or not, it leads to the conclusion that we, each and every one of us, have some of this transcendental essence, and that its discovery within ourselves, not in the depth of the sea or in outer space, but within its discovery within ourselves and our ability to relate to it and to spiritually profit from its immense power. Because if you want to use that term, monotheistic term, what this is a piece of God. Yeah? Oh, I know a lot of Christians who would definitely condemn me as being not Christian. But then I think some of these appellations are dependent on important internal factors. But in any way, so what we have here is that it is somewhat like the Hindu story that the gods hid something. Something very, very important, something very, very powerful, very, very beautiful, very transformative, and they hid it inside the human being. Now, once we take that into account, then maybe we have a little notion as to what my late teacher, Richard the Palatine, was really talking about, because this is what he said, this is the task. This is what we as humans are here for. And this is the only way that we can help others, and we can help ourselves to go on a campaign to discover this hidden glory within us, which then really has the capacity to take care of an awful lot of things. And certainly this is not the invention of an Australian gentleman, but it is a very cogent discovery, I would say, which is sustained by much of the esoteric tradition, and which, if true, I shouldn't use that term, if true, is an incredibly wonderful promise for us. But like many promises that are made especially by important people, they have to be fulfilled, And that's something that my parents, God rest their souls, imbued in me as a small child. When you promise something, you fulfill it. When you make a promise, when you make a disclosure of something that you are going to do, then you have to fulfill it. Why? Because that's what a gentleman does. And I changed the gentleman a little bit into a Gnostic, so here we are. But it's really very important, because I assure you, we all have in our lives occasions when we have a chance, an opportunity to fulfill some important promise, or not to fulfill it. And we have done both in the course of our lives, even if we are not 93 years old like moi. We're not 93 yet. I've got to wait till November. Sagittarius with the arrow. But it is therefore very important to become aware of that promise, as Bishop Palatine used to call it, the God within, and here is a quotation from him, and then make use of it. Make use of it by being faithful to it, by asking its advice, by asking its help, and by fulfilling what we may be promising to this internal being. And once again, this is not a recent invention. Maybe the way I'm expressing it is more recent, but we find it in the Poimandres of Hermes, where Poimandres sits there and he does the invocation of the higher being, and all of a sudden this huge spiritual being, taller than the building, arrives, and asks him sort of, "You called?" But then he's of course very much shaken up. Poimandres is very shaken up. But then he looks at this apparition closer and closer, and he sees that the apparition has his features. It has a face which is very much like his face, and it's very, very large, but that's I think the whole difference. And so then it comes to him that this is himself, but in a higher, in a transcendental, in a spiritual form, and that this is his real self that he should be keeping in mind and working with. And so we find these kind of things in many traditions, not even very powerfully represented. I found it in Sufi sources. The great Sufi teacher Ibn al-Arabi wrote about it, of Henri Corbin, who was the great translator and commentator on Ibn al-Arabi. I think that is one of the most magnificent books in print. But in any event, various other traditions also recognize this, that the German word for it, and I'm sure it came from the magical and alchemistic tradition, the word for it is doppelganger, because doppel is double, ganger is gain, the double walker. In other words, whether you are aware of it or not, whether you even like it or not, is somebody walking along with you on the road of life. And you should be glad about it instead of disturbed about it, because that other, that doppelganger, is that is really the hope of our life, the hope of our incarnation, and the promise of divinity. And we can discover this spiritual fact, as Rudolf Steiner would call it, geistige Tatsache. Only in German can you have expressions like this. The very sound of them is so impressive. Now then, anyway, whatever the case may be, this is what we are talking about, and this is what Richard Palatin was talking about. You can, if you work at it, and he had, in fact, we'll get some more copies of it and the reprint of this article where there are lengthy quotations from him. We see that he had specific meditations that we were to do primarily when he was here, but also when he was not here, and that were all intended to stimulate the other presence, the old man, as he sometimes called it, inside, because it's obviously older than we are in our present physical shape. And this was of extremely great importance, because, it would seem that that's really what we're here for. This is the grail. This is the pearl of great price. And you can have all kinds of metaphors and all kinds of beautiful imagery, but that's what it is. And to the extent that I had some experiences along those lines, I must say that I have found that disclosure to be quite accurate. So now then, what happens later? Well, what happens later is that if the closeness with the eternal self, with the higher self, as came to be called in Theosophy, which I think is a good word for it, higher self, becomes more part of so an integration takes place of this transcendental being within and the not so transcendental being out here, and that ends up being a very happy combination, a very happy marriage, probably much happier than most marriages that are performed in our society. Although, let's say, being a priestly type of individual myself, I have performed many marriages, and I have found that particularly in the really nice, old, dignified liturgies, if you look at it with those eyes, you can discover that what they are these are the physical reflections in human marriage, the physical reflections of a transcendental mystery where the inner being becomes united with the higher self. So this is the mystery of the bride chamber, as the Gnostics called it. And of course there are many different aspects of that, but this is what we are talking about here. Now, here we are. I think that we knew, of course, in broad outline form as to what the teacher was trying to convey, and we tried to act accordingly. And I don't know whether we were, all of us who were there that day or other days, whether we were able to do much with it, but we kept it in mind, let us say. And oh dear. Well, all right, if I run it up on the flagpole, I might as well utter it. 2 times in my long life, I would say, I was in a place where, not in myself, but in someone else, I discovered the higher self, the essence. The one time it knocked me out so much that it took me, I think, 45 minutes to get off the couch. And another time it wasn't that powerful, but let me see, there were experiences that I never forgot. And with them almost always comes the message, let us see. This is who you are. This is what you must work on. This is what you must become, because that is why you are here. Not anything else but that. And then I found that the sacramental life, for instance, of the church, when I became a priest, 10 years later when I became a bishop, that the sacred rituals of a long time ago, just like the sacred rituals of ancient Egypt, much of the time were designed to facilitate this kind of a union of the human being. That this is really this is the true meaning of the resurrection of Osiris, for instance. You know, so Osiris gets killed by his brother Seth, and he gets dismembered. You know, the Godhead is often dismembered because then you have to go around and find him in different places. And that's what Isis does then. She goes through the countryside and she says, oh, there is the foot of Osiris. So come on, let's take that. Oh, over there is his arm. Let's take that. And then they assemble it all. And says, now what am I going to do? I don't think that those were her words, but we have to answer. And I think then she discovers, well, you know, what we can do is assemble him and bring him back to life. But for that, to assemble it, that she and her son Horus managed to do. But as to bring him back to life, she needs somebody for that. So she calls in Thoth, also known as Hermes, in the form of the ibis bird with a long beak, and he comes. This is how you do it. He utters the sacred words, and they put Osiris back together, and then Thoth says, Pharaoh, rise. Pharaoh is back. So I kind of lapsed into my Egyptian mood, but let's say there are various reasons for that. For long time, again partly because of some teachers, not even so much Bishop Palatine, but like Alvin Boyd Kuhn, my dear old friend, they always said, you know, if you try to trace the fiery cord in all of these teachings, it always will lead you back to Egypt. That's ancient Egypt, pharaonic Egypt, was really the fountainhead of the esoteric tradition. And there I think I should live up a little bit to my promise and indicate just very quickly that I think that there are, obviously, with a mystery religion like the Egyptians, which had armies and armies of gods and goddesses. There is no activity, no pursuit that the Egyptians could engage in that they didn't have a couple of gods for, which I think pleased them greatly. So we find that there was something that some more intuitive writers have discerned, and that one can find the reverberations of it in several books, and that is this, that like most of the polytheistic, so-called polytheistic religions, the many gods are never envisioned as the ultimate. They are powerful, and you can pray to them, and you can sacrifice to them. I like especially the ones that like to have geese for sacrifices, you know. Why? Because a goose is... then I visualize myself as a priest of that particular Roman deity, and then after, the goose is sacrificed, then the priests are allowed to cook it and eat it. So I would look forward to a good goose dinner, and particularly a goose liver, which is a very, very great delicacy. And I think that any government, state or federal, that forbids the serving of goose liver should be overthrown automatically. We should have a constitution that would say that he who outlaws goose liver should be outlawed himself. But anyway, don't take these things too seriously. I don't doubt it that you do. But in any event, the Egyptian roots are there, and it has been discovered, but mostly in esoteric ways. So if you go to the museum, like the big museum in New York, has beautiful Egyptian things. Well, what is it called? The Metropolitan? Yeah, the Metropolitan Museum. They have a whole complete smaller Egyptian temple. So it's really very nice. I mean, you got to give credit where you must. But let us say the discovery has been made, I think, largely in esoteric ways, from hints in various scriptures, including Gnostic and otherwise, and I would say from there, and also the parallels which exist in other traditions. And what I'm alluding to is that no matter how many gods and goddesses a particular religious tradition may have, there is always an unknown God, a mystery, a totally transcendental being, and that is the source of them all. And they know it is there. And in Egypt, apparently, according to the researchers of some, it was a god named Amun. Now we are all familiar, or some of us are familiar with Amun-Ra, which is the sun god. But Amun is higher than Amun-Ra. Amun-Ra is the original god. And those who were particularly chosen to be kind of avatars themselves, you might say, or at least divine messengers in ancient Egypt, have always prayed to Amun. And a few times it would seem that the supreme deity Amun incarnated, because there was need for him to be here on earth. And you know who he incarnated in? The invincible Alexander. Because the old Greeks were very smart cookies. They had all kinds of things that they could do, and they were able to appeal to Amun. And Amun came down, and Alexander was born. So in any event, that's just a historical oddity which, however, possibly carries, I think, all kinds of weight, because having been so interested in that since way back, since I was a child, and I kept pestering my father, who was Alexander? Why was he great? You know, he says, come on, we'll look him up in he had all these big historical books. In any event, let us say that is an unusual circumstance, which if one is able to investigate it thoroughly, which is by no means easy, may be found to be present in many different traditions. Now, Blavatsky referred to the ultimate deity by the Hindu name of Para-Brahman, that which is beyond Brahman. Now, Brahman is beyond Brahma and Shiva and Vishnu and all of those boys. But ultimately there is a totally transcendental deity, and that is Para-Brahman, he who is beyond Brahman. And in fact, there is a good story which is supposedly true. Madame Blavatsky was, I think it was in India, and somebody, I think Leadbeater wrote this down. It was an American lady. And Bishop Leadbeater was suspicious of Americans, not without some good reason. In any event, she said that this American lady, and he said, they always do things like that, these Americans. And that's why it was written, they always do things like that. And then that she asked HPB, why did Para-Brahman create the world? And Blavatsky rose up in her chair with her cigarette in her mouth and said, I surely don't know, my dear. Because, really, to read the mind of the ultimate Godhead is a little bit difficult. But it's a good story, anyway. In any event, let's say, I am convinced, just on largely intuitive grounds and a little bit of corroborative evidence, that the basic structure, including the ultimate which is also always present, the ultimate which is there and here and there and there, and the Para-Brahman, or the Adi Buddha, which in Vajrayana Buddhism it would call. So most of the great traditions have a notion of a totally transcendental power which yet is ever present and which has been the source and origin and will be probably the ultimate conclusive destiny of all. So now, so all of that happened because I didn't sit down on my chair on 4758 Melrose Avenue, and Bishop Palatine was conveying this. But let us say my conviction about the extreme importance of the recognition of the strange dual relationship of the human and the divine, especially also after 2 times I saw this, so I feel, I saw this transcendental self, this higher being in someone, a live person, appearing, and talk about transfiguration and resurrection and things like that. When it really comes forth, like at that time, it's incredible, it's glorious, it's magnificent, even to our veiled perceptions. Now, whether that was only true at that particular case, I cannot tell. But let us say the manifestation of the higher self in a human personality is always a sublime, a wonderful, and a greatly inspiring experience if you can get a whiff of it. Can you imagine how how well, I don't know what to call it. All these words are around and they have been so much abused, transformative and all of that. It's all new age gibberish. But let's say it is something comes forth from and within a human person that you didn't have the slightest inkling was there. And when it comes, boy, it comes and it knocks you down. And you will never have the same relationship with that person than you did before. It can make for great unhappiness too. Because what if you saw that in somebody else's says, I'm going to stick close to this person, and then the person dies. All right. Bye-bye. And various other things can happen. So what then? We can't be here forever. And after all, we are talking about Gnostic magic, so we can come back to these things in other ways. But what it really, I would say what it boils down to in a very important way is that if we do our work right, if we lead a life of internal guidance and of goodness, and we try to do things well, and if we have ways in which, by whatever means offer themselves, we can get close to this transcendental being, and later on in the Friday series I will mention various elements of the vision of the Holy Guardian Angel and the conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel and ultimately the union with the, as they called it, the Holy Guardian Angel. So there is a literature, there are things that we can learn and things that we can do that will facilitate that process. And it is really my opinion at this particular time. It's only an opinion, but it's mine, oh man. But that, to a very large extent, that is what we are here for. To assist that development within ourselves and maybe assist others to do likewise. Why? Because only when that occurs are we fully grown-up humans. That is the individuum that Jung was talking about, the indivisible unity that we can become. And that seems to be pretty much the goal of human life at the present time. Of course, we come up with 1,000 substitutes. But you know what? Substitutes are never the real thing. And that, if we haven't discovered that yet, then we got something to learn. So in any event, this is a very important element. And it's the kind of element that is routinely overlooked. Why? Because it's not introverted in nature, in the sense it doesn't take into account the inside. It's always other things. You should be good. You should be charitable. You should give the poor and all kinds of things. Of course, I don't see why not. Good people will always do that. Well, there was a time in Los Angeles when the homeless population hadn't really appeared yet in its full and dubious glory, when even though I had very little money, I always had something in my pocket for panhandle. And much of the time, I would say, at least inwardly and sometimes in other ways too, I was rewarded. Sometimes in those days, we are going back now to the 50s, to the 60s, and so in those days, out of out of a dark alley in the Alvarado district, out steps somebody. And I hand him a little money that I have there. And he thanks me profusely. He says, "Sir, you better go home quick, because something important is waiting for you there now." And I said, "Thank you, sir. There is the bus." I'm getting on. And it was true. So the nature of it really don't matter at this point. But certainly we should lead an ethical life, a life where we are with somebody, namely ourselves, that we don't mind living with. Because if you don't like living with this person that you are, then what the heck are you here for? So it is important, and it's important to watch the development, watch the various manifestations of this transcendental inner being. This particular gentleman whom I was quoting, and some of whose words I have here, this was his task, and something like 2 months after my consecration as bishop and after we set up the organization here, he was living in San Francisco at that time, coming down here frequently, while at the house of a friend of mine, he didn't wake up. So apparently, I would say that the main thrust of his work was accomplished. But I see now from the Australian journal that when he was still in Australia, he also accomplished a great deal, and that this was a transformed insight that came to him while he was in Australia, that this was the purpose of life, and he started, he never had a note, he never had a book in front of him, although he read a lot when he was alone. But I think that he started something very important. It's not the only one. I would say that if I were the great clairvoyant of the ages, C.W. Leadbeater II, combined with Edgar Casey, I don't know who else we can throw in. In any way, then I would know more about it. But I think that probably beginning in the second half of the 20th century, and going into the 21st century, all over the world, there were and there probably still are scattered some individual teachers like that who start the development. They are like a spark plug. Plug them in and you got it. And so we need to look out for that, because as the Sufis say, the friends of God you will run into anywhere. You will meet them anywhere, or maybe they will meet you. But whichever way it will happen, I do think that this is probably one of the most important disclosures, and that it was particularly pertinent to the late 19th century occult developments with Blavatsky, that this internal being, this Christ in us, the hope of glory, as St. Paul called it, should be rediscovered, and that people who are thus inclined and who are able to do so address themselves to that and come to the vision and to the conversation and the union with this incredible being that, hidden away in the jungle of our personality, waits. And reminded of a particular favorite German poem of mine by a modern Austrian poet, Franz Karl Ginskey, who the poem has to do with the fact that he's looking to the distant heights where the evening sun still shines. And he says, there is my fortune, as he calls it. My good fortune stands up there quietly holding a tree. And then he says, but my other self says, you don't have to go there. You can experience that here. And then he does this, because he says, the real happiness is looking to the distant heights where the evening sun still shines and where the unfulfilled awaits us, quietly standing next to a tree. Now, I'm a very bad translator of German poetry, and therefore I didn't do it poetically, but I have listened to lectures by that poet and was very taken by him, and I am going to get a copy of that poem before my cousin leaves Vienna, because he was only, after all, I saw him in person, so he was really a contemporary. And he was sort of what Austria has, similar to America, of the poet laureate before the Nazis came to Austria. And a very fine gentleman. He was an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army, like my father was, and things like that. So in any event, it's that sort of thing. It doesn't require a big ado, although maybe the preparations may be going on for years. But in due course, and with our informed and devoted and insightful preparation, there is absolutely no reason why it couldn't happen to us, in us, and with us. Because this is the real human. The real human is the inner man. Call it inner man, inner woman, I don't care what else you call it, but it's that strange consciousness that is within. And every once in a while, especially when things are tough, when they're coming in to shoot you or things like that, something speaks to you. Do this, do that, and you're going to get out of this. And it can happen, and I've seen it happen, and I've seen it happen to my father, and these are all proofs of the fact that something very powerful, something very wise, something very benign is with us. We carry it around everywhere, and maybe it is time after all these years, however long your lifespan is, maybe it's time to get closer to it. Maybe it's time to begin to open up the doors. Maybe it's time to bring the representative of Amun into our lives, and where we can also say, like one of the popes, Pope Alexander VI said when he was elected Pope, and they asked him, Holiness and Santità, what name do you choose? And he said, we choose the name of the invincible Alexander. Not a Christian saint by any means, but let's say there is a sort of an Amun development in history, which is very interesting, and if I live another 93 years, then maybe I'll write a couple of books about it. But it's not neither that nor the precondition are very likely. But I am very happy that I managed to bring, I don't like the word share, you know. I don't share, I say. But let's say, I think there are some very profound mysteries of life here. If we even uncover some of them and are able to utilize them to some extent, then we will be well rewarded. And as Blavatsky would say, and next week I'll read a poem by her which is really quite beautiful. Blavatsky would say, if you don't do it this time, well, if you don't make it this time, there will be other opportunities. But she sort of warns you, well, you know, don't wait for reincarnation. Come on, do what you can now. You know? And I think if we can do something about this, then we have really done something important. And all the politics and all the warfare and all the preoccupations of this world are like nothing compared to that glory that is within us and is awaiting its coming forth. And it's coming forth to bring to us of its glory and of the glory of the ultimate, who, for lack of a better word, in some of the traditions has been called the Father. There are valid reasons for that, but I can't really think of anything more wonderful, or anything more promising, anything more exciting and transformative and peace-bestowing than that. May that experience come to as many of us as possible, and as soon as possible, and God bless us all.